What's going on, guys? My name is Chase Rost, and in today's scooter video, I'm going to be teaching you guys how to 540 flare. Alright, before we dive into 540 flares, I got a couple prerequisites that I want to mention. For starters, let's make sure we got on a helmet. It is so important that you guys have pads, and I'm not just talking about the helmet. I'm talking knee pads, elbow pads, hip pads, butt pads, all the pads that you could possibly wear, the better. This trick is a serious one, and you want to make sure that your body is fully covered, because if you start taking some heavy impacts, you're not going to be able to progress and keep going at this trick. So keep your body protected. You'll thank yourself later. Now let's talk about what kind of ramp we want to be trying this on. For me, I have a nice 5-foot quarter pipe right behind me. It's made out of wood, so it's nice and forgiving, and if I happen to fall and slide, I got a nice graceful slide out. For you guys, I would highly recommend, if this is your first time ever doing 540 flares, attempt this onto resi first, preferably even a foam pit. If you guys have the opportunity to ride into a foam pit and do an air into the foam pit, practice the 540 flare into foam first, then take it to resi, then to wood, then to concrete. If you guys only have concrete, I would not recommend sending it straight to concrete. At bare minimum, bring mattresses to your skate park or whatever quarter pipe you guys are trying it on to try this trick. Now let's also make sure that you guys have your flares completely dialed. You want to be able to be like aware where you are in the air while you're mid-flare. If you guys can know where you're at mid-flare, it's going to make 540 flares a lot easier. If you guys need some help learning how to boost your flares or just get more aerial awareness while you're in the air, click the link up above and it'll take you guys right to my how-to flare tutorial. But now that we got the prerequisites out of the way, let's jump into 540 flares. You guys are ready to dive into step number one. And right in step number one, we're going to start talking about what kind of quarter pipe we actually want to do our 540 flares on. So as I mentioned before, I have a 5-foot quarter pipe right behind me right now. This right here is the perfect size quarter pipe to try 540 flares on. You don't want to try a 540 flare for the first time on a super small quarter pipe like this one where it's only 3 foot tall. You want to stick to at a minimum of 5 foot. If you're going up in the 6 and 7 foot ramps, that's even better. But for starters, 5 foot seems to be the least intimidating while also giving you the proper pop to get the actual rotation for the 540 flare around. Now I would like to mention also, if the ramp is slightly steeper, that's actually a good thing. It'll help kick your 540 flare around as opposed to being super mellow and potentially maybe even knocking the coping. You don't want to do that. That's also why we mentioned before, you want to wear hip pads. And now that you guys know what size quarter pipe you guys are going to want to attempt your 540 flares on, let's move on to step number 2. Right now, we're going to focus on just attempting a few flares while mentally thinking about spinning an extra rotation. Because after all, a 540 flare is just a flare and a 360 combined. So what I want you guys to do is do a couple flares, and while you're taking off the lip, just like in your head, or even maybe verbally out loud, say, all right, right now I'm doing a 360, and then pulling the flare. Trust me, this is going to help you when it comes to actually doing the 540 flare, because if you guys can mentally and physically can be with it and aware of where you are in the air, it's going to make this trick so much easier, especially when it comes to spotting the landing. But now let's move on to step number 3. This is when it starts to get really interesting, because in step number 3, we're going to talk about how you form your head when doing the 540 flare. So for starters, we first got to decide which way are we spinning. Are we spinning left or are we spinning right? Usually this is dictated by which way you air. So if you're going to air to the left, you're going to tilt your head to the left. Now if you spin to the right, you're going to tilt your head to the right. This usually is dictated by which way you flare. So if you flare goofy, you're going to flare to the left. If you flare regular, you're going to flare to the right. Now let's talk about how our head's going to be positioned for the 540 flare. This is really important, so pay close attention. For starters, we want to make sure that we're tilting our head straight back. This is important because we want to start the 540 flare with the actual backflip. Once we got our head tilted straight back, we're going to tilt it to the side and look over our shoulder. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to tilt our head back and then over our shoulder. We want to be looking over the shoulder the entire time. Now, while you're doing this and you're getting comfortable looking over your shoulder, leaning back and stretching it out, you want to hold your scooter close to your body. The goal right here is to hold your bars around your hip range. Actually, preferably if it even touches your hips, that's actually a good thing. So when you're coming up the quarter pipe and you're about to take off, you're going to look back, tilt your head back to the side, and then start to pull with your shoulders to the side. Now that we know what we're going to be doing with our head, let's move on to step number 4 and talk about how we're going to approach the ramp. You want to make sure you're going up the ramp just like you're doing a normal flare, which means you're just going to be going straight up the ramp. That's how you do a normal flare. You start down here, you go up straight, you pull the flare, you land, and you roll away. You're doing that all going straight up the ramp. You're not turning off to the side early or turning off too late. You're just going straight up the middle and then coming back straight back down. Now, sometimes there's a time and a place for an alley-oop. The alley-oop can sometimes help kick the 540 flare around a little bit quicker. So for those of you guys who do not know what an alley-oop is, basically an alley-oop is when you, instead of going literally straight up the ramp like that, you're gonna be starting over here to the side, carving it a little bit, and then when you do the flare, you're actually gonna land a little bit farther this way on the ramp. That's from a goofy perspective. Now if you're regular, you're gonna be starting over here on this side, carving a little bit, and then when you land, you're gonna land over here. Basically, wherever you started from, you're gonna be drifting to the side. But like I said before, there's a time and a place for the alley-oops. You don't wanna start out trying 540 flares with an alley-oop because sometimes that can throw the rotation off in the beginning. So let's just stick to just going up and down straight like we're doing a normal flare. This seems like a good spot to jump in and talk about how much speed you want to have when approaching this trick. When you're doing this trick, you just want to have just a pinch more speed than when you do a flare just about a foot above coping. If you struggle to do a flare a foot above coping, like I said before, you guys can click in the upper right hand corner and watch my tutorial on how to flare. But for those of you guys who do know how to flare a foot above coping, that's where you want to hang when you're doing your 540 flares, or at least when you're starting to learn your 540 flares. If you have any less speed, it's going to be a little bit hard to get the air time to properly fit the 540 flare in the air. Now if you go a little bit faster, it may give you a little more air time, but sometimes it's a little bit hard to tame that speed while you're doing the spin and time the landing properly. So you want to hang right around about a foot above coping, maybe just a pinch higher than you would normally do a normal flare. Now that we know we need to go straight up the quarter pipe to start the 540 flare, let's go ahead and combine step number 2, where we're talking about what we're going to do with our head as we tilt it back and to the side, and let's combine that with step number 3. So as we go up the ramp and we're going straight, we get towards the top of the ramp and I get near that coping, I want to now rip my head back and to the side. Let me repeat that again. Back and then to the side. It's super important that you go back first to start the actual backflip instead of starting the rotation too early. I'll talk more about why this is super important in just a few seconds. So in the meantime, let's go ahead and talk about what angle we want our body to be in while we're doing the 540 flare. You want your body to be as vertical as possible while in the air. If you start going parallel with the coping, it makes it really hard to pull the flare around the rest of the way, so the angle of which you're gonna land is gonna be super difficult to stick and roll away from. So a good way to picture this is actually just picturing a clock. We have the 12 marker, we have the 11 marker, and the 10 marker. Between that 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock is where you want your angle of your 540 flare to stay. If it starts getting closer to like 9 o'clock, it's gonna be super hard to land. Now for you regular riders, you're gonna wanna keep it between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock. Right at that angle right there is a perfect angle to do your 540 flares. The reason that that area is a good angle to do your 540 flare at is because it gives you the right amount of angle to do the backflip while being able to still rotate the full 540 to get the flare the rest of the way around. I learned this reference from Dylan Morse, so if you guys want to see his tutorial on how to 540 flare, I'll have it linked down below in the description. But now let's move back to why it's so important to have your head tilt back first and then to the side. The reason that this is so important is because you have to be able to start the backflip before you actually start the spin for the 540. If you start the spin too early, it's going to force your body to go parallel with the coping, and it's going to turn into a sideways like lateral spin, which is going to be really hard because it's more of like a dip 900, which is going to make this trick super tricky to land. So like I said before, you want to make sure you're tilting your head back and then to the side. That way you're making sure you're able to keep your body first, starting the backflip, then rotating. Now if you guys realize that your body is going parallel with the coping, usually this is a case because you ripped off too early and you didn't lean far enough back. You don't want to build the muscle memory of learning the 540 flare the wrong way. So we're just going to pause for a second. We're going to just focus on leaning your head back and then to the side. This will help reduce most of the issues when it comes to rotating off the lip and going a little bit too sideways. As long as we tilt back first, then lean to the side, we should be good. You want your head to be the guide. As you guys can see in this clip right here, my head starts to turn and then my body follows. This is key because what your head does, your body's gonna follow and do, which is why we wanna lean our head back first and then to the side. If we start rotating and turn our head too early before actually leaning back, our body's gonna follow and do the same. Just like if we start to lean back, our body's gonna follow first, leaning back, starting the backflip, and then we're gonna follow through with the spin, which will finish the 540 flare. Oh yeah, PS, the reason I'm putting so much emphasis on where your head should be and how you should be rotating is because I struggled with this tremendously. It was such a hard thing, and actually it was a really scary thing when my body would go parallel with the coping because I would lose complete sight of the quarter pipe and it would just be a really bad time. I wasn't able to get the flare around the rest of the way, and it just really made it a really hard trick to learn. So if you guys learn this properly the first time, you won't have to go through what I went through, where my body started going parallel with the coping, and it just made it a really rough trick. So make sure your body's staying up at that degree right there, and you should be good to go. I think you guys have got this beaten into your head enough. Let's move on to step number 6. At this point, you guys should now know how to properly approach the ramp, how to properly angle your head while doing the trick, and now at what angle you should be attempting the 540 flare at. So now let's move on to how to stay committed. Staying committed is super important because while you're doing the 540 flare, you're gonna be spinning like a top. You're gonna be spinning so fast, and if you happen to uncommit, your scooter's gonna go flying, your body's gonna go flying, and your whole orientation is just gonna go crazy. So the main thing with this trick is you gotta make sure you're staying committed. The way to stay committed is to keep your scooter close and tight to your body, and as I mentioned before, you wanna pull your scooter into your body and almost touch your hips, depending on how tall your bars are, depending on where your bars are gonna rest on your body. For me, because my bars are at my hip level, when I do the 540 flare, I pull and turn, and basically my scooter presses against my body as flat as possible so I can get as much rotational speed as I possibly can. So for step number 6, the main point is to stay committed, and the way to do that is to stay tight. I call this penciled out, so when you're in the air, you stay penciled out the entire time, committed while you're spinning, and it'll make this trick a lot easier. Now that you guys are staying committed, we're ready to move on to step number 7. In this step, we're gonna talk about how you're gonna spot your landing, slow down your rotational speed, and absorb your landing to roll away and land your first 540 flare. So for starters, when we're spotting our landing, at the first point at which we're gonna see the quarter pipe is gonna be once we've completed the 360. Once we've completed the 360 for the 540 flare, it's gonna turn into a normal flare. If you look at this point right here, you guys can see my body is literally almost in the exact same position as to when I'm doing our normal flare, maybe just a little more penciled out. But nonetheless, from this point, all we're gonna do is start to curl in our scooter to our body and just complete our normal flare. Because after all, once we've completed the 360 and we're upside down, the only thing that's left is a 180-degree turn, which is just a flare. So once we've done the 360, we're coming around, we're spotting that landed, we've officially seen the quarter pipe. Now we're gonna tuck in the scooter, which is by force going to slow down our rotational speed because we're no longer penciled out, we're curling in, our rotational speed is gonna be closing, and then as we're approaching the quarter pipe over here, just slightly crouch our knees to be able to brace the impact and as well keep our arms nice and loose. We wanna be able to steer away when we're doing the trick. This trick's gonna have a lot more force than a normal flare because think about it, the rotational speed from the beginning combined with a normal flare is gonna be forcing you down a lot faster. So to keep that in mind, you're gonna wanna stay loose and absorb the landing as you roll away from your first 540 flare. That right there is steps A to Z on how to 540 flare. Now I know this is a complicated trick, so that means that we most likely all are gonna learn this trick slightly different. So if you guys have done 540 flares or you guys have some helpful tips that you guys wanna add down below in the comments, please go down in the comments and let everybody learn from your experience. These tutorials that I make for you guys are really just to help everybody's scooter better. So if you guys have any advice that you want to pass on to other scooter riders, drop it down below in the comments and we'll all progress together. But before we wrap this bad boy up, I want to end you guys with a couple extra tips and a couple common issues that a lot of scooter riders have when they're trying their first 540 flares. I have my list right here. We're just going to run them down and I'm going to overlay some clips while I'm doing this. Tip number 1 is going to be actually really kind of a no-brainer, but you're going to want to make sure that you're trying this trick on a ramp that you're super comfortable on. If you're not comfortable with trying like regular flares on the quarter pipe, you probably shouldn't be sending 540 flares on that quarter pipe. I know that's a no-brainer, but I just felt like I had to add that in today's video. So make sure you find a comfortable quarter pipe that you're used to doing flares on and send them. Now for tip number 2, this one's going to focus on what majority of today's video is focused on. Staying vertical in the air. It is so important that you guys stay vertical in the air. It's gonna make this trick come around 100,000 times easier. If you start going parallel, you're gonna have to do what I talked about earlier in today's video, which is keep your head straight back, then rotate. Again, you don't wanna rip your head to the side too early or it's gonna force your body to start rotating sideways before it starts rotating vertically. Now again, if you guys need any extra help with learning how to 540 flare, like I said before, you guys can drop a comment down below and I'll be down there to help you guys knock out your 540 flares. But now moving on to tip number 3. Let's get real, just wear pads. It's so important that you guys put your pads on when you try this trick. I know in today's tutorial, I only did this tutorial with the helmet on, but literally every single clip that you guys can see me overlaying in this video, I have full pads on. It's very rare that I'll ever do a 540 flare without my hip pads on, my elbow pads, and my knee pads, because there's certain times that this trick can just go absolutely wrong. You just don't want to end upside down on this trick. So wear your elbow pads, wear your knee pads, wear your hip pads, wear your helmet, and you'll thank yourself later. The end goal of all these tutorials is to help you scooter better, and if you're not protecting your body properly, you're not going to be able to scooter better longer. So make sure to take care of your body and wear the proper gear so you're not going to get hurt and you're going to be able to scooter and progress a lot faster. Now moving on to tip number 4. As I mentioned in the beginning of today's video, I highly recommend trying this trick on a foam pit, a resi, or some kind of mattress. The best scenario that I found was to place a mattress on each side of you while you're trying this trick. When I learned my first 540 flare, I had a mattress on my half pipe over here on both sides of me with about a 2-foot runway in between. That way, if I even did a slight alley-oop in my 540 flares, if I went off to the backside, I was able to land comfortably on a mattress without getting hurt. So for those of you guys who don't have a resi or foam pit near you, you guys can take some mattresses to your local and knock this trick out. But that right there is going to wrap things up for today's video. Please make sure to give me a big old thumbs up because I take a lot of times to make these tutorials the best that I can for you guys. I try to pack in as many tips and tricks that I've learned from over the years, and I try to combine them all into one video so you guys can learn the best and fastest way possible. As well, make sure you guys are subscribed down below to my channel because you know I'm going to be dropping more videos just like this one. And again, if you guys have not already commented on today's video, make sure to drop me a comment below and let me know what tricks you guys want to learn in the future. But that's going to do it for today's video. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Later.